Welcome to this reading of Decline Denied. I'm Rob Davis, and I hope as you listen to me read this book, you'll understand and sense the passion behind why I wrote it and why I started the Prime Project. Now, I have two small requests. Number one, as you listen, if there are thoughts or questions or suggestions you have, please feel free to share them. And number two, please share with anyone you feel like would benefit from listening to this. That way we can get the word out and we can have a positive impact together on society and the desire to not let age define who we are and who we can become. So let's get started right into chapter 1. I entitled chapter 1, The Waiting Room. So here we go. When I turned 60, I didn't feel finished. I felt ready. Not to reinvent myself, not to chase relevance, not to deny my age, just ready. Ready because the noise had settled, I knew what mattered, I knew what didn't, I had made enough mistakes to recognize patterns faster. I had fewer insecurities and more perspective. The urgency to prove myself had faded, but the desire to contribute had sharpened. For the first time in my life, experience and clarity felt aligned. It honestly felt like the next 20 years could be the strongest stretch of my life. Then I started paying closer attention to people my age, not strangers, peers, men and women with real experience, people who had built companies, led teams, raised families, survived recessions, navigated crises, and earned scars that younger generations hadn't yet accumulated. And I noticed something uncomfortable. Many of them were already winding down. They weren't collapsing, they weren't in crisis. They were just adjusting downward, talking about slowing down, talking about stepping aside, talking about the golden years. That phrase stayed with me, golden years. I mean, it sounds peaceful, even earned and deserved. But what I saw underneath it didn't look golden. It looked like contraction, energy being dialed back, standards softened, ambition quieted, expectations lowered. It wasn't dramatic. That's what made it hard to confront. It was drift. And what bothered me most wasn't aging. Aging is real. What bothered me was how quickly decline was being accepted as inevitable. Fatigue became normal for this age. Weight gain became just part of getting older. Pulling back from responsibility became finally taking it easy. No one called it surrender. They called it maturity. But I couldn't shake the sense that something valuable was being left unused. Aging is real. Lowering the bar is optional. A few weeks after my 60th birthday, I ended up at a small get-together with people I've known for a long time. Same age range, same decades of life behind us, same basic story. Work, family, responsibility, hardship, success, failure, the whole deal. We weren't talking about nostalgia. We were talking about the next chapter. Someone asked a question people ask when they don't know what else to ask. So, what are you going to do now? Not next, now. The answers were telling. Probably just travel. Or, I'm going to try to keep my stress down. Or, I'm done with anything that feels demanding. I just want peace. Nobody said, I'm going to build something better. Nobody said, I'm going to get stronger. Nobody said, I'm going to sharpen my mind. Nobody said, I'm going to mentor hard and lead well. Nobody said, the next 20 years are my best work. Now, I don't say that to judge them. I say it because it was like hearing the same sentence repeated in different accents and really just saying, I'm stepping back. Then the conversation turned to health. It always does at this age. Someone mentioned their blood pressure. Someone else joked about their cholesterol like it was a personality trait. Another person described a medication list that sounded like a small grocery receipt. A couple of them weren't joking. They were resigned. I watched the body language while they talked. Shoulders a little rounded, eyes a little dull, laughs that covered something uncomfortable. There was a heaviness in the room that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with expectation. At one point, someone said, at our age, you can't do what you used to. Maybe that's true in one sense. Maybe you can't recover the same or tolerate the same foolishness or bounce the same way. But what bothered me was the hidden conclusion. So don't try. That line is culture in a sentence. At our age, you can't. Therefore, stop. I asked a simple question. Compared to who? They looked at me like the question was strange. Compared to who? I asked again. Compared to yourself at 25? Or compared to most people at our age right now? Because those are not the same comparisons. If you compare yourself to your 25-year-old body, you will always find a reason to back off. If you compare yourself to what most 60-year-olds are accepting as normal, you might realize the bar has been lowered into the ground. That's what I was seeing. Not people aging, people agreeing to less. And the agreement was so casual, it was almost invisible. I saw the same pattern in a professional setting, and it was even harder to watch because it was so polite. A colleague invited me to a meeting, a kind of meeting that used to carry weight, not a performance review, not a ceremony, a transition, a handoff. The language was friendly, almost celebratory. The person handing things off was smart, capable, a steady operator, the kind of leader who had earned the right to speak plainly because they'd carried real responsibility. But as the conversation unfolded, it wasn't a handoff of tasks. It was a handoff of identity. They talked about creating space for the next generation, which sounds noble until you realize no one had asked them to leave. They talked about not wanting to be in the way, as if experience was an obstacle. They described their future plans with the same casual tone people use when they talk about reorganizing a garage. Less travel time, less stress, less pressure, less decision-making, less. And I remember thinking, this person is not being retired. They're retiring themselves, not because the work is too much, because the culture has quietly suggested that leadership has a shelf life. What bothered me wasn't the decision to reduce hours or simplify life. That can be wise. What bothered me was the unspoken belief that their best contributions were behind them. They weren't talking about mentoring. They weren't talking about sharpening their judgment and using it more deliberately. They weren't talking about becoming an anchor for younger leaders. They were talking about disappearing, a soft exit. And the room rewarded it. People smiled and congratulated them as if fading out was the appropriate next stage of adulthood. I walked out of that meeting thinking, if we keep applauding the soft exit, we are going to lose the very people who should be steadying the ship. Not because they are forced out, because we've taught them it's normal to step back. There's a story we tell ourselves at midlife. You've worked hard. You've earned the right to slow down. You don't need to push anymore. On the surface, that sounds reasonable. Relentless grind isn't wisdom. Burnout isn't strength. But buried inside that story is a quiet assumption that usefulness fades on schedule, that intensity belongs to the young, that once you cross a certain age line, contraction becomes appropriate. That assumption is reinforced everywhere. Advertisers show older couples strolling on beaches at sunset. Workplaces quietly shift meaningful decisions to younger voices. Cultural messaging celebrates retirement more than reinvention. The message is subtle but consistent. You've done enough, now step aside. The problem isn't rest. The problem is reduced expectation. Reducing unnecessary stress makes sense. Reducing standards doesn't. And once expectation drops, behavior follows. People don't collapse overnight. They just stop demanding as much from themselves. They stop training hard. They stop learning aggressively. They stop taking on uncomfortable challenges. They stop thinking in decades. Not because they can't, because they're not required to. Because there's no social penalty for shrinking. In fact, there's often social reward. If you keep training hard at 60, people say you're intense. If you keep setting goals at 60, people say you're trying too hard. If you keep building at 60, people say you should relax. But if you drift, no one challenges it. They nod, they understand, they call it normal. Normal is a dangerous word. Normal can mean common. Common can mean accepted. Accepted can mean unexamined. And unexamined, decline spreads. Here's what I realized at 60. A lot of people treat 60 like a finish line. They think, I made it now. Now I can stop. But 60 is not a finish line, it's a fork. One path is contraction. You start choosing what's easy. You start protecting comfort. You start avoiding the hard edges. Your world gets smaller, your body gets softer, your mind gets less curious, your relationships get more fragile because you have less patience and less energy. The other path is expansion. You keep building, you keep training, you keep learning. You keep taking responsibility. You get more selective, yes. You stop wasting energy on nonsense, but you do not shrink. You get sharper, you get stronger. You become more useful, not less. Both paths are available at 60, and many times even earlier. Culture points you toward contraction. It calls that normal. It calls it deserved. It calls it wise. But normal is not a standard. Normal is an average. And if the average 60-year-old in modern culture is unhealthy, unhappy, and half checked out, then normal is not where you want to live. I saw this in the gym too, not just in conversations. You can walk into any gym and watch the same pattern play out. The younger crowd trains hard because they think they have to. They're trying to prove something. They're trying to become something. They're hungry. Then you see people in their 40s and 50s who are still pushing, but the language starts changing. They talk about maintenance. They talk about not getting hurt. They talk about just staying active. Some of that is appropriate. Injury avoidance is not weakness. Smart training is not quitting. But then you see the next group, the ones who stop showing up at all, the ones who used to be athletes, the ones who talk about what they used to do like it was a former life. And here's what they often say. I'd love to, but my knees. I'd love to, but oh, my back. I'd love to, but I'm too busy. Most of them never got a clear diagnosis. They just got older and assumed pain equals permission. They assumed discomfort equals danger. They assumed effort equals injury. And the body believed them. A body that isn't trained starts complaining louder, not because it's broken beyond repair, but because it's deconditioned. It has less tolerance, less resilience, less margin. And when margin disappears, everything feels risky. Stairs feel risky. Travel feels risky. Playing with grandkids feels risky. A long day feels risky. You don't lose freedom all at once. You lose it in small withdrawals. Now, before you assume this is about someone else, pause. This is where it gets personal. Here's how contraction starts for a lot of men and women. It doesn't start with a dramatic decision. It starts with a quiet trade. You trade training for busy. You trade sleep for productive. You trade discipline for deserved. You trade challenge for peace. And then you call it maturity. It shows up in small sentences you don't even notice. I'll get back to it when things calm down. I'm just not as energetic as I used to be. Or it's not worth the effort anymore. How about, I don't need to push like that. That's for younger people. Each sentence sounds harmless, but put them together and you get a new identity. Someone who is easing out, a person who is slowly exiting, a person who is preparing for less. And here's the part that matters. Your body adapts to the story you tell it. Your mind adapts to the demands you place on it. Your emotions adapt to the pressure you train under. If the story is, we're winding down, the system starts winding down. Drift rarely announces itself. It whispers, you've done enough. You don't need to prove anything. You've earned comfort. Comfort is not evil, but comfort without demand becomes erosion. Erosion doesn't show up all at once. It accumulates. Strength fades, sharpness dulls, confidence narrows, influence shrinks. Not because you hit 60, because you stopped requiring more of yourself. If you want to catch drift early, listen to your own language. Drift always shows up in sentences before it shows up in outcomes. Here are 4 lines that should make you stop. First, I'm just trying to stay active. Active is not a standard. Active is a movement without intention. Active can mean walking in circles. Active can mean doing what feels safe. Active can mean never challenging the edge of your capacity. Second, I don't want to get hurt. Well, neither do I. No one does. But if not getting hurt becomes the primary goal, you'll build a life shaped by avoidance. And avoidance has a cost. The body that is never challenged becomes fragile. The mind that is never stretched becomes narrow. The emotions that are never trained under pressure become reactive. Third, I've earned the right to slow down. You've earned the right to be selective. You've earned the right to stop wasting time on nonsense. You've earned the right to protect your energy. But you have not earned the right to abandon your usefulness. Fourth, that's just age. That phrase is a permission slip. Sometimes it's accurate. Often it's lazy. And it's a way to stop asking better questions. Is it age or is it sleep? Is it nutrition? Is it training? Is it stress? Is it alcohol? Is it a decade of low demand? If you don't ask, you won't know. And if you don't know, you'll accept decline. That didn't need to happen. Here's the point. The earlier you catch drift, the easier it is to correct. Drift becomes dangerous when it becomes identity. This is just who I am now. No, this is just what you've been practicing. And what you practice becomes normal. The human body adapts to demand, so does the mind. If you stop lifting heavy things, strength declines. If you stop solving difficult problems, cognitive sharpness softens. If you stop pushing through resistance, resilience weakens. This isn't controversial, it's basic biology. Demand shapes capacity. When demand drops, capacity follows. That's the disconnect I was seeing. At 60, many men and women have more perspective than ever. They see patterns faster, they understand trade-offs better, they've lived through cycles, they've survived mistakes and learned from them. That kind of wisdom matters. But if physical, cognitive, and emotional capacity is drifted downward, that wisdom doesn't carry as far. Experience without capacity struggles to influence. Insight without energy struggles to lead. Judgment without resilience struggles to hold under pressure. Age changes the body. Behavior determines the capacity. Capacity determines influence. At this point, some people push back. Well, isn't slowing down wisdom or isn't this just denial of aging, or isn't relentless pushing immature? Look, fair questions. This is not about pretending you're 30. It's not about ego-driven performance. It's not about chasing youth. It's about refusing premature irrelevance. There's a difference between eliminating unnecessary stress and eliminating meaningful challenge. There's a difference between intentional recovery and passive decline. There's a difference between wisdom and resignation. Maturity should increase clarity. It should not decrease capacity. The goal is not to live like you're 25. The goal is to remain capable at 65, to remain steady at 70, to remain useful at 75. That requires intention. It does not happen automatically. And it doesn't require obsession. It requires standards. Standards are what keep drift from taking over. A standard is a line you don't cross. A standard is what you do when you don't feel like it. A standard is what you protect when culture tells you to let it go. Some people hear a message like this and immediately label it vanity. They picture someone chasing youth, terrified of wrinkles, competing with 25-year-olds trying to prove something. That's not what this is. Vanity is about appearance. Capacity is about function. Capacity is the difference between being a burden and being an asset, between needing rescue and being able to help, between shrinking your world and expanding it. When you maintain capacity, you're not trying to look young. You're trying to remain useful. That matters in family, it matters in a business, it matters in a community. There's also a moral component people don't like to talk about. The people who depend on you don't get to vote on whether you drift. Your spouse doesn't benefit when you become fragile. Your kids don't benefit when you become mentally foggy. Your team doesn't benefit when you avoid hard decisions because you don't have the energy. The world doesn't benefit when experienced men and women withdraw as their judgment becomes most valuable. This is not vanity. This is stewardship. Aging will take some things. That's reality. But surrender takes far more than aging ever demanded. And surrender is optional. When capable people shrink, the loss isn't personal, it's cultural. In a noisy world, signal matters. Experienced men and women are signal. They are ballast in volatility. They are context in chaos. They are judgment in a reactive age. When they lower their own standards, the ripple spreads. Teams make weaker decisions. Families drift without anchors. Communities lose stabilizing voices. And younger generations grow up without seeing what sustained excellence looks like in later decades. You can't lecture a teenager into discipline. You can't talk a young adult into resilience. But you can show them. You can show them what it looks like to keep your word, to stay strong when it would be easy to soften, to stay sharp when it would be easy to coast, to stay steady under pressure. That example is worth more than advice. And that's why the decline of capable adults bothers me. Not because I'm nostalgic for youth, because the world needs adults who can carry weight. Here's something most people don't think about. When experienced adults drift into resignation, younger people pay the price. Not because younger people are weak, because younger people are learning what normal looks like. If the adults they respect treat 60 like the beginning of the end, the next generation will internalize that script early. They'll start planning their own retreat in their 30s. They'll stop aiming high in their 40s. They'll accept that that's just age before they've even earned real wisdom. But if younger people see men and women in their 60s and 70s who are still strong, still sharp, still stable, still contributing, it changes what they believe is possible. It changes what they expect of themselves. That's why your personal standard is not just personal. It becomes cultural signal. When a capable adult drifts, the first losses are private. A little energy, a little patience, a little strength, a little appetite for challenge. But the bigger cost shows up later, and it shows up around them. A family doesn't just need love, it needs leadership. Not dominance, leadership. Someone steady, someone who can absorb stress without spilling it on to everyone else. Someone who can keep their word. Someone who can stay calm when the room gets hot. When you lose capacity, you lose that steadiness first. You get short with people you love. You withdraw instead of engage. You avoid hard conversations because you don't have the emotional margin. You numb out because it's easier than staying present. That's not a character flaw. It's often a capacity issue. The same thing happens in organizations. Decision-making requires energy, not hype. Energy. The ability to look at reality without flinching. The willingness to make a call when people are uncomfortable. The discipline to hold a standard when everyone wants the easy option. When leaders drift, organizations drift. Meetings get softer, accountability gets vague, standards get revisited, performance gets managed instead of demanded. And what replaces a clear standard is politics, narrative, noise. This is why I get angry when culture tells experienced men and women to step aside. Not because younger people are incapable. They're capable. Many are brilliant. But judgment is earned through time under pressure. It's earned through consequences. It's earned by being wrong and paying for it. Then being right and paying for that too. When seasoned adults withdraw, the learning curve for everyone else gets steeper and more expensive. Here's a simple way to say it. A younger generation needs two things. They need opportunity and they need example. If they only get opportunity, they may build fast and break things. If they also get example, they'll build with wisdom. Example is not advice. It's not speech. It's what people see you do consistently. That's why your personal standard matters. It becomes permission for others. If you accept drift, you give the people behind you permission to accept drift. If you refuse drift, you give them a different script. A life can expand in later decades. Strength can grow, clarity can deepen, influence can increase. And that changes the culture. This is where most people make it too complicated. They wait for motivation. They wait for a new plan. They wait for a perfect season. Don't. Standards are not complicated. They're simple lines you won't cross. Here are a few examples. You can choose different ones, but you need some. You train even when you don't feel like it. You don't let your sleep get destroyed for weeks at a time and call it normal. You don't eat like a teenager and then complain about energy. You learn new things on purpose, not by accident. You do hard conversations promptly, not months later. You keep promises to yourself, especially the small ones. Those may sound basic. Good. That's the point. Basics practiced consistently keep capacity from shrinking. And capacity is what keeps influence alive. If you want a single phrase to carry forward from this chapter, let it be this: your life will drift in the direction of the standards you tolerate. So tolerate fewer, because the waiting room is comfortable. That's why it's crowded. But comfort is not the goal. Capacity is. And the difference between the two is the difference between fading and remaining. If you want a simple checkpoint, use this. Don't overcomplicate it. Just answer honestly. The physical. Can you climb stairs without getting winded? Can you carry something heavy without negotiating yourself? Do you recover from effort, or do you avoid effort because recovery is hard? The cognitive. Can you focus for an hour without compulsively checking your phone? Do you still enjoy learning, or does learning feel like a threat? Do you make decisions clearly, or do you delay because your mind feels foggy? On the emotional, do small things irritate you more than they used to? Can you stay calm when someone disagrees with you? Do you have patience, or have you become brittle? How about relational? Do people come to you for counsel? Do you have the energy to lead, or do you withdraw because it's easier? Are you building relationships or maintaining distance? If those questions sting, good. A sting is feedback. It means you can still feel the problem. There was a moment around 60 where I realized I wasn't just reacting to what I saw in other people, I was choosing a line for myself. Because drift is easy to see from the outside and subtle to see in your own life. You can point at someone else's resignation and call it tragic, then quietly make the same trade in your own routine. You can critique the golden years script and still let your standards slide because you're tired and no one is watching. So I made it personal. Not dramatic, not performative, personal. If I still have wisdom, I will protect the engine that delivers it. If I still have influence, I will keep the capacity that supports it. If I still have people who depend on me, I will not choose fragility as my future. That's what decline denied means to me. It's not a slogan, it's a refusal. A refusal to let comfort become my identity. A refusal to let fatigue write my story. A refusal to accept cultural expectations as biological facts. Aging expects you to fade. Don't. Not because you're trying to be young, because you're still needed. And because whether you admit it or not, people are watching what you tolerate. They'll learn from it. They'll mirror it. So choose what you want them to learn. That's the line. That's the standard. And that's where this book begins. No one accidentally becomes strong at 65. No one stumbles into clarity at 70. Capacity is built, protected, and renewed on purpose. That is the whole point. You don't have to do everything, but you have to do something. If you want the next 20 years to be your best, you can't outsource that to time, luck, or genetics. You have to choose it. And the moment you choose it, the waiting room loses its grip. In the next chapter, we're going to widen the lens because the world you are aging into is not the world you started in. The pace is faster, the stakes are higher, the margin for drift is smaller. And that is exactly why capacity matters more now than ever. If you want a simple test for whether you're drifting, ask this. Are you currently training for capability, or are you maintaining decline? One produces confidence, energy, and momentum. The other produces excuses, caution, and a shrinking world. Be honest, then decide. Because the decision is rarely made in one dramatic moment. It's made in 100 small choices. Make the next one count. And if you've already drifted, don't panic. Drift can be reversed quickly once standards return. Start small, start today, build momentum, not perfection. If you take nothing else from this chapter, take this. Don't confuse comfort with wisdom. Don't confuse fatigue with destiny. Don't confuse the culture's low expectations with what you're actually capable of. The waiting room is crowded. It's full of good people who quietly accepted less. You don't have to join them. Set a standard, train for capacity, protect your usefulness. Because the next 20 years can be the best of your life. But only if you refuse to act finished. And one more thing. This isn't about becoming extreme. It's about becoming intentional. Small standards kept consistently beat big declarations you can't sustain. Let me say that again. Small standards kept consistently will always beat big declarations you can't sustain. You don't need a new personality. You need a line you won't cross. That line is what denies decline. I'll see you in chapter 2.